Hey, this is Eli. In this live coding session on AI DIY, Brice, an academic, researcher, and professor of digital humanities, discusses the impact of AI on research methodologies, particularly in the fields of history and digital humanities. He and Keith explore how generative AI tools can aid in the research process, from formulating questions to analyzing historical data. Together, we touch on the challenges of accessing data, establishing causality, and the iterative nature of research. At the end, we reflect on the future of AI in academia and the importance of collaboration among researchers.
Well, I am an academic, putting that in quotation marks. So I do a lot of research in the field of history, in the field of science and technology studies, as they call it. So I spend a lot of time reading, looking at documents, writing, and as AI, particularly LLMs, have taken off over the last couple of years, I've been really interested in how this can help my work because I do think, my kind of field is perhaps uniquely positioned to be aided by these language tools, these generative AI tools in that kind of domain. So, but on the other side of the coin, I'm also a really big open source advocate. I care a lot about things like privacy, digital autonomy, digital sovereignty, and I've kind of begun to think more about these issues, especially in the last year or so. That's kind of how I got interested in AI and just thinking about how these things could be applied to my work. But also, I'm of two minds a little bit in that I very much value these tools, but I also think that they can come with some problems, both like as an individual in terms of the privacy, so on and so forth, but also like macroeconomically potentially as well. So, but yeah, that might be more than you asked for, but that's kind of how I got interested.
It's actually kind of right on. I think my follow up would be, and then I'll let Keith ask a question, is uh, if you think about like starting a research project 3 years ago compared to if you were to start a research project tomorrow, what is the like stark difference as a result of like generative AI, as a result of recent technology?
Hmm.
How has your work as a researcher, quote unquote academic technologist, like how has that changed, in that kind of 3 to 4 year time span?
That's a really good question. Well, if we're talking strictly about the research side of what I do, because I do research, and up until now, my primary job has been in research, although I've recently shifted into more of a teaching role. And so on the research side, I'd say that the beginnings of the project haven't really changed that much, where we're sort of thinking through like these bigger philosophical issues. We're kind of trying to think about the literature and what's already been written and where we can kind of intervene or make a new contribution. But where I think has really changed is the middle to late stage of the project where you're trying to convert the ideas you have in your head into words on a page, or when you're trying to process through a bunch of documents that you've already kind of scanned and looked through in the archive. And so now I find myself very frequently when I'm trying to write something, if I have an idea, I'll literally like record on my phone just me like stream of consciousness talking, and then have an LLM just be like, here, write this in a more scholarly tone, something like that, and get a sort of at least beginning draft, beginning outline of a more polished piece of writing or a more polished output. And that's been really helpful, I think, in that process of converting ideas into written language that makes sense to someone other than myself.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
totally. We kind of talk about this as like the articulation barrier. Like
Mm-hmm.
I know what I want to say, but I don't quite know exactly how I want to position it. And
Yes.
if I can articulate myself to, a thought partner, that can be really helpful to
Mm-hmm.
move an idea forward, whether it's pair programming, collaboratively writing, design. That articulation barrier is like you just rub up against it over and over, constantly, every day. But Keith, I think you were gonna ask a question. What was on your mind?
I think I'm just wildly interested in the topic that Bryce works in, so I'm kind of like excited to ask a bunch of different questions, but we could start anywhere you want, not necessarily where I jump in. My big, I think, first question is just like, what is a project for you? Like, in terms of like, yeah, what is your past work? Because I think I have specific questions about how it could work, but
Sure. Yeah. Well, my dissertation that I wrote was on the development of the medical device industry in the late 20th century United States. So I wrote about physicians and engineers and how their different professional backgrounds informed their approach to crafting regulation. At the same time, I also have another angle to my work, another methodological lens to my work, which is this field of digital humanities, as we call it, which is applying computational tools to answer more humanistic, kind of non-quantifiable questions. So I've done work using natural language processing and other things like that to, for example, process, it was like 300,000 journal articles on biomedical technology written between like the 1970s and 2000, kind of track changes in the prevalence of certain topics in the scientific literature. So yeah, that's kind of my specialty. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah.
No, it absolutely does. And this is like a huge hobby of mine. I know it's your job and that you are professional. But like since AI has come out, I feel like it has empowered the space of like computationally reading. Like I've been going over newspaper archives, like trying to find out shit about my family and stuff. And it's like that's insane. Like and I think my first question is like on your research in particular, I think there's three parts to my question is like, how do you determine like what the main idea of like what you're trying to discover is, especially at that like higher level where you're trying to learn things about society as a whole? And then the second one is like, is access an issue to the data? Because I feel like with history, often like, this is just how history works. Like the vast majority of stuff is like we just haven't read the history or don't have access to the history of other people's perspectives,
Yeah.
and like that's something that's hugely valuable. And then the third question is just like, yeah, how do you read all of that stuff? It feels like that's gotten a lot better in the last few years.
Definitely. Well, you say I'm a professional, Keith, but no, I think certainly you seem like you've really thought through a lot of these issues and your perspectives, you're really thinking like a historian. So that's great to see. But I would say in terms of, I guess well, let me begin with the access question, just because that's something that comes to mind immediately. Yes. So, I mean, in terms of my work, in terms of traditional historical methods, the primary way that we do work is we go into the archives, we access these documents, these remnants of things in the past. We interpret those, we analyze those, and then we come to an argument based on that evidence. I do think AI is sort of changing the game there a little bit, and that yes, like you said, there's just tons of stuff in the archives that no one's ever looked at. I don't know. I think there are certainly risks in if we were to purely say, well, let's scan everything and then run it through an LLM and have it summarize it for us or have it identify important things for us. But I definitely think that's something that we could work on, that we could consider.
Do you choose like the sources first, or do you choose like a general topic and then try to find the right sources? Like, how do you approach that?
Yeah, and one modification of that question, I'm reminded of I had an amazing professor in college that like my very first day of class. He was an architecture and design professor. And we're all like these deer-eyed 18-year-olds coming into college, and he said, "Where do good ideas come from?" And so building on Keith's question, like how do you know you're on to like a good genesis like of a project?
Yeah, I think it really starts from exploring what other people have already written. At least the way that that I was trained like in grad school. And I think the way the disciplines encouraged me to think is always, what is my contribution to the literature? So it comes from reading and learning in a bunch of different spaces. And from that comes a question of like, oh, well, here's this thing that, you know, it seems seemingly people haven't really thought about, or that people haven't thought about in a particular kind of way. And then from there, we have to ask the question of like, well, are there sources that can help me answer this question? And then sometimes we run into that challenge that Keith is bringing up of like, oh, there actually just aren't sources for this. Like, there's just no way for me to actually know this or like access information about this. And that's why we get creative sometimes doing things like digital humanities or looking at material culture, where we're trying to find other ways of looking at information or getting information where there isn't traditionally sources that we would be able to use. Not to get too much into the weeds, but I'm a big proponent of there's an author whose name is escaping me right now, but he basically writes about this idea of where good business ideas come from. He's a business historian, business scholar, and he basically says that the ideas come from people being in touch with many different domains, many different like parts of society. And then from that, they can sort of see these gaps or see these places where things can be synthesized, or see places where there's potential for progress. And I think the same is true even when we're talking about in academia. So at least for me, I think being in touch reading in a lot of different literatures, reading in a lot of different fields, being involved, just like, reading the news and seeing what people are thinking about in society, I think is really helpful for coming up with new ideas, new projects. And then, the sources can be a challenge even if you have a really good idea or a really good intervention.
Totally. Can I just go in like a different, like, not even think it's a different direction. There's a question at the end, although I'm going to talk about something that I did just to kind of frame it. Right. So like when like the New York Times released like a new like digital archive, like I don't remember how long ago, but when it came out, I was like, this is awesome. I could find things. And my grandpa always claimed that his grandpa worked for Thomas Edison. And I was always like, okay, sure. There's no way that you could prove that. And I like was able to find him in like the newspapers, right?
Oh.
And I was like, oh, this is crazy. Like he's in there, like he's writing stuff, he's doing things, or he's not writing, he's doing stuff for Edison, etc. But then like, and then I knew that for like a while, like for 10 years probably. And then I like was able to dive like back in deeper as it's gotten easier to search. And I've like also learned a lot about history in that interim period. And I feel like that context that I've built has allowed me to learn a lot more obvious things. Like I found like his like party records, like he switched to the Progressive Party in like I want to say it was like 1919. I'm not the best with years in history, but like in that progressive era, I couldn't figure out why he switched to progressive when he was like so clearly like a Republican in terms of like he worked for Thomas Edison, right? And then I finally read an article about him, like in it, they reference like the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, which like it was a thing that you just kind of have to know about, right? And it's like his office was right next door, and I was like, that'll probably do it.
Yeah.
That'll probably make you like flip your party allegiance on some level.
Yeah.
And I don't know, like little things like that. Like how can you like when this AI goes, and so this is my question. Sorry, I wasn't just trying to say I did that. When the AI goes back in time and looks at things like that, like how do you think about what perspective you want it to look at certain documents for, or like tangential documents that could help it build that context, right? And how, like, to me, that's like the most important thing, because like if you just rely on the AI alone, it's just going to have the biases of the internet, which is inherently the worst biases. It's just like like history is all about the perspective in which you look at it, and you can like tie those events together. And I feel like we have the ability to finally process all of these documents, and it's like, what do we do?
That's a great question. I wish I had like a concrete
heady.
answer to that.
I mean, thinking about that. Yeah, I don't know.
That's a real challenge. I mean, so one thing that I've found, even just in my, and going back to your earlier question, Eli, of where do ideas come from? How do things change? I think, just being able to surface things is a great tool or a great capability of AI, so like, talk about, reading the literature and stuff. Okay, but there's more books published ever than I could even possibly begin to think about reading. But like I can put into AI, tell me some texts that have been published recently on XYZ topic. And it's quite good at surfacing things that are, that I maybe wouldn't have come across, just a traditional Google search that I wouldn't have come across just from my prior knowledge of the topic. So yeah, but I don't know, how does that then apply when we're talking about primary sources? Like how do we prompt AI to like understand what we actually care about, what kind of lenses that we're looking at, what kind of things we want to surface, what kind of things do we find valuable? I have no idea. It might mean that we go back to that we lean on some more natural language processing kind of things. Like I know Google has a new framework out where they're basically using their models to do like named entity recognition and things like that. So maybe we go to a more basic level of just say, hey, tell me the names of every company that was mentioned in the New York Times in 1935. And then that's maybe a starting point or something that we didn't realize was there. People have done cool things with word frequency where we look at, okay, what are the most common words in this body of documents? And that might be an indicator of what was a common topic or what was really important to the people who were writing here. So yeah, I have no clue, but I look forward to seeing what people come up with.
To what degree in your like analysis of history have you found like the frequency in which something is published to be like an actual barometer of like what people thought were important, specifically around like the time period of like that 19th century, like the end of it? Like I feel like there's so much stuff published from that era. Like very specifically, like AI has allowed me to find primary sources, but not necessarily like analyze a bunch.
Well, this is like a big methodological question. Like, yeah, just because something was well circulated or that it was published a lot doesn't necessarily tell us about who was reading it specifically. It doesn't
Mhm.
really tell us about how that information was received. So you're right. You're always kind of making some assumptions there and making some interpretations there. And that's true, I think, of all kind of, academic study, of all kind of, even in the natural sciences, when you're looking at a bunch of data that's come through from an experiment, you're interpreting there, you're making some assumptions about the way the world is working or the way your equipment is working when you're doing that. So yeah, I know it's hard to say, and I think it's even harder when you get into like media studies where you're analyzing film. Like, how is a film received by people? It's hard to say.
Yeah. So
Right. Just except for how much money it made, and then you're
Yeah,
like, that doesn't mean it's good, I hope.
exactly.
right. Yeah, I'm pulling up this image because I do a lot of like speculative foresight work,
Mm-hmm.
and I think what we're talking about is kind of the reverse, right? Historical, digital humanities analysis. But
Mm-hmm.
what inspires me, or what I'm trying to like connect to, and what you've shared, and what Keith's bringing up, is just because there's a decision that's made, an event, or like a trend that's recognizable, the real power comes from contextualizing.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the direct results, or what you might hear as like first order effects?
Mm.
What are the indirect results, which would be like second order or tertiary, right, effects? And you can, in really good foresight work, you kind of go all the way to the fringes, right? We really
Mm-hmm.
tried to abstraction ladder and understand, okay, just because Trump was Time Person of the Year, right?
Mm-hmm.
If that's the event we put in the middle,
Mm.
there's a lot of context,
Yes.
right? The Democratic leadership, Bernie getting subverted, blah, 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 blah. Right? And all of a sudden, the forest becomes very obvious.
Mm.
And we can actually, then work on interventions, that kind of come back from the outside. And so it's interesting because, or what comes to mind is like, although, let's say malaria, right, is something that, came up as significant in the early 20th century, right, or late 19th century, for example. How do you think about like when you're composing a digital humanities project, or does this like resonate with you? Are you thinking in these kind of frameworks?
Yeah, I mean, well, this is, one of the, I guess, I don't know, controversies within kind of the field of academic history is this question of predictive value. So like economists, for example, are very quick to tell you, well, yes, we can do our analysis and we can predict what's going to happen in the economy. Let me,
All right, bro. Yeah, I know. It's the worst, man. It's the worst. And that,
yes.
like, you guys all believe different things, and you can't all be right. So how could you think that the topic is right?
I've worked with a lot of economists and business people. I've literally sat in a meeting with people and someone will throw up some data on the slide and I'll get 5 different interpretations of the same thing. Anyway, let me not put anyone under the bus. But
Right. I'll also
yes,
say I've left
now
meetings with
historians
economists.
traditionally we would say, well, no, we're not predicting. Yeah. I mean, we would say we're not predicting. We're just sort of understanding. We're trying to understand patterns. We're trying to understand, how things change. We're trying to understand what is the nature of human society. That sounds kind of pretentious, but you get what I'm trying to say. And so I don't know. I don't really think about this like line of causality in that way when I'm kind of crafting a digital humanities project. And that might be a reflection of the kind of work that I do, where it's both digital humanities and it's like grounded in these more traditional methods. I see kind of the digital humanities work as surfacing information that then feeds into other kinds of research or other kinds of analysis, if that makes any sense. Like, to give you an example from my previous work, one of the things I found in the scientific articles I processed was that tons of them were related to like contact lenses and cataract surgery and that kind of thing. And I was like, why is this here? But looking into it further, it turns out that contact lenses were actually one of the things that prompted some of the initial concern and regulation of medical devices. And so that's kind of something I found out just based on surfacing information in a body of documents that I would never have been able to like read by hand, if that makes sense. And so that's kind of how I think. But I don't know. I mean, maybe there are opportunities to use AI to do more of this kind of causality work or more of this, I don't know, future casting work.
Yeah, what's interesting on the podcast previous episode, we interviewed Avi Yashin from a company called Subconscious AI. You might be kind of interested in this, where his whole niche was employing large language models for causal research. And there's really a dearth of causal research because you can't run studies that cause harm. And so you can't really know or sort of know causality in certain psychological research, certain behavioral research, and they're growing like crazy. So maybe worth checking out in your spare time.
I just want to interrupt because I was also thinking about this in the context of like when after that, it's like when he said that there couldn't be causal research, I definitely thought to myself, like, well, what about like historically? I can like make some assumptions of who went through it and who didn't end well, right? I mean, there's not like a good analysis of like mental illness, and so you can't obviously like track it. But like this is the theory I was thinking of is like, could you track if certain people in history actually had certain mental illnesses or like exhibited the signs of it and see what that like impact that had on the world at certain stages?
Yeah.
And I think you arguably could on some level like do that, but then you could try to take that and project it forward. And that seems like it just seems like there's so many changing variables at any given historical time that it's
Yeah.
like I mean, I don't know. It would be hard to do like in mass, but you could do it for any one person, right? Like I
Yeah.
could probably tell you like scientists are going to explore this next if it like identifies with like the money flows into science or something over a historical period. Like it might be able to see things like that.
Well, can I ask you all a question then? Given, I mean, okay, like I'm not a computer scientist by any means or anything like that, but given what these machine learning kind of AI things are doing, which my understanding is that it's kind of a predictive thing based on like taking in tons of data and then kind of finding these correlations. To use that term correlation, is there not a risk then that a correlation is being perceived as a causation, you know? Like, can we fundamentally actually trust these tools to tell us what is causal rather than just telling us that there is a relationship between X and Y and it's up to us to figure out how and why that's happening?
So my answer is very much no, that we can't do that, or I don't think we should, right? I don't think that's like the purpose of the tool. Like, and I think that a lot of people like propose that you can do these causal things, but I just think that a lot of things are interrelated, and humans are much more predictable than we want to be, right? Like the fact that we're able to predict, like like Facebook's able to predict ads to the level where you think it's listening to you, and you're just that predictable that you might want to go buy a bike right now.
Yeah, that's
Like
true.
it just sucks. Like it just is a fact that like that number is like quantifiable, right? And so like I don't know, I really kind of forgot the main point I was making there because there's a lot of like levels to it. But in general, like that predictability, like I don't know how much like it's like it's like applicable in mass to like the backwards into history. Like I don't know if you could derive enough context to like predict or to say like this person did this and then to try to do it projectively in the future. I don't
Yeah,
know if
I
that makes
think
sense.
it just reinforces for me the importance of like we should connect you with Avi because he's using synthetic users to take existing research studies that indicate causality, seeing if he can recreate them to statistical significance with synthetic data to answer the question you're bringing up. Like if his company can get really good at consistently recreating or replicating the results of a study with synthetic data, then you could foresee employing those, right, to some level of confidence on causal research in the future. But right now, their niche is replicate results with a statistical significance and accuracy, get really good at that, and then employ it for new research. So I don't think we're there yet. It's going to take a lot of data. It's going to take a lot of testing, evaluation, but he's working on this problem. So I think you all would hit it off like in a really interesting way I wasn't thinking about,
Yeah,
before this.
yeah. No, that's really cool work. I would love to be in touch or learn more. I don't know, and I'm thinking back to kind of the medical angle of this. That's where my mind goes when we talk about causal research. And I mean, I know there's been tons of controversies over the randomized controlled trial as like a methodology. Surgeons have said like, well, you can't really apply an RCT to our kind of what we do as surgeons. And there's tons of instances historically where people have said, no, this trial does not represent our experience, our lived experience with this medication or with this sort of whatever it may be. So yeah, no, that's interesting stuff. Once again, I don't really know what to think about this, but yeah, I'd love to
Lots
talk
of questions. Yeah,
Okay.
lots of questions.
Can I
Yeah.
pose like the way so I'm just going to pose a shower thought I had that
Yeah.
connects disparate, complicated ideas that I kind of know a little bit about,
Mhm.
right? Which is that like the problem you're describing like very much resembles like this P equals NP problem in computer science, which is that you can like the P equals NP means that like the problem like it's about an arbitrary like thinking of all problems like holistically around like certain data things, and you can think of it this way. But like if I have a problem that is like the solution is verifiable in like a
Mm.
certain amount of time, it could
Mhm.
still be like it's still infinite to find that solution, right? And so
Mm.
like in a lot of ways, LLMs like resemble like the subsets of things they generate and the problems downstream like resemble of like I could so like the reason that like synthetic data is valuable is not because it's correct. It's actually not the same as being it's like not the same as regular data. Like regular data, you can assume like, I guess, or this is also a little dramatic, but you can assume that it's correct if it's in the right circumstances, right? On some like mathematical certainty level. But even if the AI is like just predicting, because the P equals NP is not solved. Like the idea is that you could find a solution to a problem in this at the same speed that you could in the same memory that you could verify it, right? But because most problems can be verified very simply, like I could, like the shortest path is the classic example here where I could verify that you took the shortest path very quickly. But if I just had to arbitrarily circle over all the possible combinations, it would take like a lifetime.
Yeah,
Right.
you never get there.
Yeah. But I could verify in 1 second if it's the shortest path or not, right? Because you
Mhm.
can mathematically say like, okay, this is the shortest way, right?
Mhm.
A lot of things are like that. And the idea behind like LLMs is that like if I put out enough synthetic data, it's not that it's the correct data. We're not aiming to get it correct. We're aiming to get something that we can then find a solution and quickly verify the solutions that it came up with until it finds the right one, basically. Or if someone solves this problem, this is like if someone solves this problem, the whole world changes. So like
Right.
I've always known that,
Quantum.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
a quantum could come to the solution to this. I think that the most popular argument is that there isn't a solution to this, right? That you really can't solve it in polynomial time to figure out the most optimal solution. But if you could, this kind of goes downstream where it's like that doesn't matter as much when you're trying to sell things with synthetic data, right? Like you might end up on a solution that's way better than you had before because you can try all these different paths.
Yeah, requisite.
But it's still kind of up to you to verify, or how it depends on how you verify what solution you choose is correct. And if you don't verify at all, then you're just going to go down mystery paths of like worlds you think are built to be correct.
That's a really good point. Yeah, the P equals NP thing has gone way above my head, but that but that basic concept, Keith, of like you can spit out so many solutions that you can then just check them, I think is really, really powerful. And to me, that's where I see like, am I using LLMs in my life today? Like when I ask the LLM to write something, it may not be what I want, but I can ask it to write something 25 different times in the time it would take me to write one thing, and I can kind of work with that. And that's where the power comes from, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right. And then
I
the
think after
sorry,
you
I was just
keep
gonna say
going.
the downside comes from thinking that you're correct. If you think that it's correct and that you're not trying 25 different ways, you're just like, I've got it down to the way. Every
Mhm.
time I end up in that hole.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. But speaking of writing something, maybe this is a good chance to use our last 30 minutes here to like break into some of the screen sharing and break open some of Brice's ideas and show folks like how we can create so many solutions so quickly. And so I was thinking about like pulling up Replit. Brice, I've actually got your write up pulled up if I could screen share it and kind of just talk through like what we want to try to make. I think it's really interesting to hear the way you're thinking about these types of problems and kind of like actually make something, together for the latter portion of this.
That sounds great to me. Yeah.
Cool. So is it okay if I screen share and pull this up?
Yeah, sure. That sounds great.
All right. So Brice and I, in preparation for the episode, right, we were kind of chit-chatting about an interesting idea that Brice had for a Git-like version control system that lets researchers share notes and annotations about archival collections that they're working on. So accessing these notes could expedite one of the slowest and most expensive parts of research, digging through archives with no idea if what's in there is what you're looking for. This is really interesting, and it kind of gets me like goosebumps, right, thinking about this problem, and just like the scope of it. And you had listed out a couple key features, some outcomes, and some example workflows. And so like this is all a really interesting starting point for a Replit prompt, actually. For one example, this first portion, and I'll actually zoom in just so it's really like visible, is actually really well written from a sort of product design lens. The opportunity to solve, and then like sort of the challenge or the issue with it today. All of this is actually super helpful context for these agentic coding assistants because they reason over these challenges. And so they might even take liberties expanding on them, sort of adding nuance. And then with your key features that you wrote up, you describe the GUI or the interface that you want to see really well. Brought in another key feature of crowdsourcing and search, etc. I think for the first iteration, I'm actually not going to bring in the user roles and profiles. And this is just me, but as a more front-end designer, UX, UI designer, I find when I'm interacting with these code generation assistants, I'm going to layer in authentication and like user permissions after I've figured out the job that the actual like product is performing, right? If there's a compelling use case, I might layer in auth and roles, role-based access in a second kind of iteration. And then you also like clarified your key outcomes. Again, I think this is a great context that the AI can like reason over. And then the example workflow is great. Like we could probably I'm curious how much we can one-shot this. Like
Yeah, can we just? I forgot we were on a podcast. I was like, Eli, why are you talking so much? Just throw this in the damn way.
Yeah. I just kind of want to make sure we all
but yeah,
understand the
totally.
the output that we're trying to achieve. And so
Because to
what I
me,
was
this
gonna
is like immediately a great idea.
right,
It's like
right.
let's throw this in there. And then my biggest question is going to be around like archival access. Like, how can we get access to the most amount of archives that we could have in one place? My experience has been this shit's like pretty locked down, and I don't really go to university, so I end up a lot more locked down. And can we use it in this way, like in terms of this being a real idea? But this feels like we're gonna get a prototype up that's gonna be cool. But like this seems like a good idea as well.
Yeah, totally.
Like this isn't a vibe.
What I'm gonna do here is, or sorry, Keith, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh no, I'm like there's a delay when I talk, so like I've been stopping, and then you guys have been like hearing me 2 seconds later, and I'm always like, damn it.
It drives the ADHD crazy. I know, right? And you're like, I want to keep going. I'm like, yeah. But Riverside's doing great, so we're hanging in there. So Brice, where I would start is Replit, right? And so I've just got a new project opened up. I'm gonna actually switch workspaces here. I'm gonna make it simpler for us. So what I like to do with Replit, what's awesome is the agent can just have an existing tech stack to work from. All of our work is typically React, Node, Express. So I typically choose the modern web app. And then all I'm going to do to start, just for this first iteration, like Keith was describing, or like we were mentioning, is actually just copy and paste it in. So I'm going to grab everything from, a GUI front end all the way down to your example workflow. And I'm going to paste it into Replit, right? And you can see here it added it as a snippet. So that's going to have the whole text of the request. And, typically with all this context, right, I'll just kind of give it a broader prompt, to help make sure that it uses the attached context. So I'll say something like, actually, I wonder if I can just do this with voice to text. So let's try this. You've been provided a project requirements document that describes a key description of a product that Brice is working on. He is an expert in the field. He's working with you to implement this, but you are solely responsible for writing all code on the project. If you need any clarifications, Brice is here to answer those questions as you get started on the project.
So can I ask a question here, Eli, about what you've done?
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm putting on my kind of like my educator hat here, because I know a lot of people are panicking about the use of AI in school and stuff. But can you tell me, like, when you just gave that prompt there, you very much framed it almost like a conversational thing, like you're like a partner with the tool. Is that a very intentional strategy of, like, quotation marks, prompt engineering? Or, yeah, where is that coming from?
You know, my posture working with AI is very much as a collaborator. So I rarely treat it as like a task or like completion tool. I'm always in discourse with it, like asking it questions, having it interview me, you know, reflecting back, ideas. And that's just the way that I get a lot of joy out of it rather than feeling like I need to know exactly what to tell it. Like, I admit my flaws, right? I say, hey, I'm not the expert. I work with engineers that are way smarter than me. Help me think of the right questions to consider. Help me explore the fringes of what I know while still like allowing me to be creative. So I wouldn't say it's like a prompt, engineering
So
approach as much
I
though.
wouldn't say it's a prompt engineering approach. What I'd say is it's more a result of like the prompt engineering underneath these tools that people are doing. So like this is an agent running multiple LLM calls, and like over time you actually like I would compare it to like the meta of a video game where it's just like if I tweaked the settings where the gravity's different, like you'd feel it, right? And you just end up talking to it different, but it just ends up being faster to say things to it because you know it's like hitting all these prompts and filling all this context in that you kind of get a sense for like where it's at and you can like direct it. And that's where the vibe phrase comes from. Because like some people just do that without knowing anything about coding and get kind of lucky. But like in general, you could tell if it's like a person, it'll get like focused on the wrong thing. And like if you leave some things general, sometimes it'll take the approach you wouldn't have thought of. Like, and it kind of varies by tool.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of like, it's not just sending one LLM request where like you would want to craft it like perfectly, right? It's like using that to generate multiple ones that it might do.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And we can show some of that here once we get out of the planning step. But let's review before we keep going too far. So we have a GUI front end for a Git-like version control system specifically designed for researchers to share notes and annotations about archives or collections. The core objective is to create the web app that allows researchers to collaboratively document and interpret these materials, making research efficient and accessible while supporting diverse perspectives through branching interpretations. So Replit produces a preview here. It's really not interactive at this point, but it's kind of going to give us a reference of what we might expect it to output. And then we've got some initial features. So I just want to give you a chance to like look at these features, and we can choose some that we don't need to focus on right now. And we can even ask it to edit the plan and update it. So maybe it missed something in your idea, or maybe you want to push it further. Based on what you're seeing here, is there anything that we should strike or change? Maybe is a little too far afield or not ambitious enough? What are you kind of seeing so far?
No, I think it looks good. I mean, the first bullet point says, archive collection management system. I don't know if that will confuse it and that we're not really managing the archives or kind of managing notes from the archives. I don't know if that's worth tweaking, but that's one thing that came to mind.
Okay, what else? Let's just keep going through it because I'll craft a prompt and we'll ask it to update the plan.
It does say it's doing the user profiles thing, although I think you mentioned it might be good to cut that out in the first iteration, which I agree that might be a bit too complex to think about right now. Yeah, integration with actual Git repositories for advanced users. Yeah, I didn't even think about that, but that'd be good to have that sort of there. If you know how to use Git, you can just kind of directly go in. Yeah, LLM-powered change summarizations for the pull requests, advanced conflict resolution tools, integration with academic databases, and citation management. That's kind of, I don't think that's appropriate at this point, just because that's, I don't know, it just seems like it's a bit complicated. One more down, integration with academic databases and citation management. Everyone has their own citation management tools and stuff like that. Real-time collaborative editing. Yeah, I think this is like also I'm seeing this as like a for later section, which is
like
these are definitely all things for later. These all
next.
seem very advanced. So
Right. Yeah. Cool. So let's see. We'll ask it to update the plan. And I'm also thinking like right now, these tools love a homepage. Like Lovable, V0, some of your other code gen tools are always gonna they typically start at like a landing page or almost like an advertisement.
Eh.
And then like I find Replit is, since it's so focused on like sort of actual full stack applications, it like loves a dashboard page. And I've kind of started, Keith, I'm curious how you feel about this, but I've really started trying to like get away from beginning at a dashboard, right? Because like I don't really care what the landing page is. Like so many times I'm actually focused on like the role of the prototype. Like what position does it play in somebody's workflow? And like it's not about like some overview with metrics. It's like that's always where these things want to start.
Yep, I'm a big believer that all construction projects start with digging a hole for some reason, and then all of these projects start with the dashboard. Like that's just my experience as a real dev too, where it's just like you always end up throwing together something like this and asking them, is this good?
Right. We did get quite a lot of changes in the plan. It looks like
but this is actually looking more like what you were saying, Eli, where it's like giving the user just the information they want rather than, numbers or whatever.
Yeah, some homepage. I'm like, don't anticipate the homepage. Oh yeah, it's cool. It's even going into the markdown editor. And I think what I'll do once it kind of finishes the preview is strike the collection management system.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder how tied that is to the box idea, right? We talked about needing to work from like a box folder, so I wonder if that's what it's interpreting as collection management.
That's probably what it's interpreting as collection management. Yeah. And I mean, at least what I'm seeing here on the slide is looking fantastic. I tried to like code up my own like Flask version of like basically this, and it actually more or less looks like a more sophisticated, or my version looks like a less sophisticated version of this. So it's really nailing what was in my head subconsciously, I guess. Yeah.
All right. So I think with that being said, I'm going to hit approve and let it run while we keep chatting.
Totally. Also, something I want to say too is that, after we're like done with this, if you have a similar repo that you've done before, I would put it into an AI tool as well, kind of ask it to say, what features does this have that mine doesn't? And then ask it to merge them over. I know it's a different language, but I do feel confident suggesting that now.
Yeah, so Brice, what he's kind of getting at while the preview is going, right? You'll see this agent is taking multiple steps to what Keith was describing earlier. So it can go look at multiple files, it can reprompt itself, it'll check in and let you know as it's making edits. You can watch the code that's being written per file, which is like, as somebody who's still intermediate, in terms of like full stack development. That's why I, work with Keith. That's why I hire engineers. I learn so much by working with Replit. Like I feel like I've grown as like a entrepreneur or creative by just understanding like the relationships in these files better. So I love Replit as a tool.
Right.
And to Keith's point, check this out, right? That we can go to Git and we can actually publish this as a repo that you can go pull down. And if you wanted to work in Replit, you could. Right, you could work with this agent, or you can just work in Git with your VS Code or Cursor or what have you. And you'll see like Replit you can manage its own deployments, its own databases. There's Replit documentation that the agent can use to read or update. I've just been so impressed by where this company is going, and it's quite powerful.
And I also really couldn't recommend enough to like using a language you're familiar in to kind of like get a prototype or something that you like, especially even on like a feature by feature level. If you're just like, this is what I want this to look like or how I want it to work, and then you send it to this like tool in the language that you're not familiar with, right? Like it'll be way better that way, I've found. Because I mean, I know that like we did a project where we were working on like a psychological like with a psychology professor is what it is. That's the right word. And like I just couldn't get it right trying to build what she wanted, right? But I nailed it when I took her Python code because I don't know what it is about universities, but something about them, the closer you live to one, the more likely you are to use Python. So it's all good.
Yeah.
And it's just like we're actively, or R or something, right? Like JavaScript is just not a university language. It's theoretically a terrible language. It's just like, it's just something that people use, right? And so it helps us build these web apps and things. But what I would say is like my mistake I've made a lot is like trying to iterate inside of this like build step when I could have iterated outside of it in a way that would have been a lot easier to communicate with people in their language. Because like the tool makes it a lot easier for me to force my language on you as well, which isn't necessarily the easiest way to get to like the best solution.
I think both of you said this then that like, this is a very iterative process for you. Like you're going back and forth, you're having a dialogue, you're having a conversation, you're working inside the tool, working outside the tool. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and something I've been doing lately, I wonder if I could probably demonstrate it a little bit with this project. If I were to deploy this project to Git, right, or just push it up to remote, I can go and actually hit that same repo with GPT-5, which is now extended thinking. I have the pro model, so it's going to crawl the repo top to bottom in the same way that this agent here, right, is constructing it. But I kind of give them two separate roles. Like, I actually don't want my Replit agent to have like critical thought at all. I want it to be an implementer. I want to give it a task. I want it to write the full code. I don't want it to ask me questions. It should be the implementer. But I'll actually use the same repo with GPT-5 crawling it to be like a creative partner, planner. And so I'll say, hey, if you were to task junior engineer with an improvement, what would it be? I don't know where I'm going to go next. Like maybe I'm hitting that barrier where my ideas are starting to exhaust themselves. And I'll actually look to GPT-5 as like a creative like partner in that way. Absolutely. Iterative, sometimes circuitous. Like I think staying out of that trap is actually the hardest part. I wonder if it's worth showing how I do that. Like, is that something you guys want to see here in the next 10 minutes? I can show you how I make them like ping pong off of each other if it's of interest.
I'd say so. Yeah, that'd be cool. I think. Yeah.
We're almost there. It looks like this first version's done. So maybe while it's doing, I'll show folks how we can add it to a repository.
Is the stuff it's saying relevant to the researcher that you referenced? I didn't read it in that much detail. Or is it just making stuff up?
Are you saying in the preview?
No, it's referencing some of the.
This guy's actual
In Bayun is a real person that I've worked in his papers and stuff. So yes, no, it's referencing what was in the prompt. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, so here in the background, while it's finishing up its generation, I'm just gonna initialize a repo in our Black Flag team. I'll call it Brice Git, and that way I can share it with you whenever we get done. I'll just create the repo. All I have to do is grab a URL. So I'm copying that, and I'm gonna come over to the Git interface, and all I have to do is paste it in and save it. Usually takes a couple of seconds for Replit to like fully connect, and this interface will update, and then we can actually push it up to the remote, and then we'll take a look at what it produced here, and then we'll kind of talk to GPT-5 about some improvements. Maybe we'll have GPT-5 give us the next iteration. So let's see.
Can I ask also? I mean, I've heard controversial things about GPT-5, but you found it to be effective and useful in your work?
I think, unfortunately, I'm still an OpenAI fanboy. So I have to admit that. Like, I love their output. I love their brand. Like, I do, just tend to have an affinity for them. Engineers typically have an affinity for like Anthropic,
As
I
with
would
a
say, right?
Claude,
Because it's been their best friend for the past 2 years, helping them build projects that they maybe previously couldn't have. So I'm having great success with GPT-5, and I'll show you a little bit about
Right.
how
And I
I'm
would like to
using it.
say that Anthropic has not been our best friend. It's the best work friend you have, where you guys just work and you don't talk about anything else. No, it's not trying to change
Right.
you. It's just trying to get stuff done. That's the Anthropic person.
Yeah.
OpenAI, I feel like it's all like, have you really thought about this?
So you'll see here just that quickly, I push this up to your remote. So now all of our changes will be tracked to Git, and you'll be able to access them. So let's take a look at what was built. It made that homepage still. It loves to do a
does
homepage.
love a homepage, yeah.
So let's see what it makes us do here. Let's see. I'll just log in with my account. Let's see. I'm already signed in, so it chose to add auth anyways. Let's see here. We've got some archives. We got pull requests. Say search. So it looks like it kind of blocked us a little bit, right, from really prototyping and testing. It's like we have to have an account. We have to manage a lot of this. So what I'm thinking is if we show the connection to GPT-5, maybe we can prompt it so that we can get more in like a prototyping space, right? So that we don't have so much like overhead in front of us, right? Like right now, I have no way to add an archive
Yep.
to the
Yep.
system, right? So let me go to ChatGPT. I'll share my screen. So how do I share this tab instead? Okay, so check this out. With the new agent mode, I can pull this up and I can go to my GitHub. I can disconnect old repos. Let's see here. I'm looking for Brice. Let's see. 5 to 10 minutes. Dang it. It's coming.
It
It's
shouldn't be
still
that bad.
indexing.
Oh, it's still hitting it? No, trigger it. Do you have to trigger it?
Let's see here. Yeah, it's still indexing. All right, let's see. It shouldn't be that long. So I'll come in here, right? And I'll say like use GitHub connector. You'll see how it highlighted it, right? To analyze the /Brice Git repo. And I'll explain something to the effect of like, we are currently trying to prototype out the core integration features and role of this prototype. And it feels like right now, authentication and user accounts are getting in the way of our progress. I want to be in a much more creative space with this repository at first, exploring features. We can use mock data at this point because we're not actually hooking up any like API services, but we're really focused on like what I would describe as like a believable simulation of the product so that we can make many iterations quickly. So Super Whisper will pop that in, which has been a game-changing tool. Thank you, Keith, for that. And then let's see. Come on. I wonder if it'll still do it.
Unfortunate.
I'm shocked this doesn't work. I mean, like, if only this company had been given $40 billion by Microsoft, who also owns GitHub.
Right?
That's a good
like,
point.
can't
I didn't even
figure
think
this
about
part
that.
out.
You're right. Yeah.
That
Like,
indexing feature is not hard. It's a very small code base. It's ridiculous.
Well, yeah, it's tiny, right? And it already went up 10 minutes ago. So actually, let me do this. I'll copy the whole thing, refresh. Let's see if it pops in here. And so I'll go to the sources, not indexed yet. Come on. Some of the other ones actually
Have
are
you tried
indexed.
just refreshing the page straight up? Like maybe it needs to sync to the back end that thinks it's indexed.
Let's see, refresh. Yeah, wow. I wonder if they're just getting slammed right now. Usually this is just almost instant.
I don't know. I always feel for like, this company is producing like this, superhuman intelligence, and yet somewhere there's a front end developer that's like the gateway between us and that intelligence.
Let's see if it'll actually, maybe it'll still grab it. We can also ask, actually, it wouldn't hurt while this is running in case it doesn't work. I'm actually going to go tell the same thing to the Replit agent. Let's share this tab instead. I'm just going to drop this in the Replit agent, removing the prompt for the GitHub connector, and we'll just let that run. Something else that I really like to do is like use the queue feature. So I'll say like implement Radix UI and a consistent UI theme that is easy to control. And then what's cool about this is I can queue these up. So if I'm like really on a roll of ideas, I'll like queue up 10, 15 tasks for this thing. And occasionally you come back, an hour and a half later and you're like, why did it? Like it went way crazy. But sometimes, right on the flip side, it actually nails it. And so I, have gone and walked the dogs or taken the dogs to the dog park because that's, a big part of my home responsibility. And I am just blown away by the work that's been done in, hour and a half, right, by this agent. So let's see. While that's running, I'll switch back over here. Let's see. Yeah, it still couldn't pull it through the repo. But the, kind of still a worthwhile point is like when I'm reading this, it takes me back to like learning Angular with Keith in like 2016 because the sort of quality of the instructions or tutorials remind me of like really great Medium articles. It reminds me of like easy code blocks, kind of easy ways for me to like progressively learn about these concepts.
No.
So for me, I've just been thrilled like with all of the output and being able to dig in. So yeah, it's just throwing up a feature flag to make like a demo environment. But see, this is all outside the scope of our actual connector.
Well, I also like this. It's kind of like really like iterates too on like the perspective that these things have. Like I find that ChatGPT is much more geared towards building consumer apps, which is why Eli likes it more because he's a designer. And like that's where the elite design experiences are is in consumer. But like a feature flag is something that I would not add to your project right now. We don't even have users.
Right.
And it's like, but if you wanted to have like 10, 15 different features, like a consumer app and flag it out, like it's a lot of times like built for those. And you could kind of think about it as like, what data is the company consuming? Right. And like ChatGPT is just consuming a bunch of consumer data. Like Replit's always trying to get you to build a single app in one go. Like they're always trying to get you to build like a landing page all the way through. So you can say, look, it built my whole site. And like Lovable feels kind of the same, but they're always trying to make it look nice and let you know that they're making it look nice. And it's all about like just the types of people that are going through it and the experiences they're building. So like in terms of like a general purpose vibe coding tool, I mean, that's like, I'm not really seeing that exist at all. Like I'm very much seeing like personalities form. And I think it resembles to me like programming languages. Like I just made that university joke about Python, but that's like one of the Python clicks is like university students. And the other one is like anyone who ever took math beyond differential equations just loves Python. I don't know why.
I'm telling you, you're sleeping on R too. Even like our buddy who worked, he just left NIH and now is working at the University of Texas. And like, not a guy I ever would have thought would know R or Scala, but he does now. Like, and he, it's just fascinating.
I have a friend that's in poli-sci, and she was like, yeah, first semester, like you have to take basically classes on R. So I think in certain fields where you're doing any kind of stats, you just have to do R in the university setting.
Totally. Yeah. It's all the licenses they buy and stuff. What are you going to get a new computer?
Yeah.
I'm just curious.
So, I mean, as you're using this as a learning tool, Eli, I mean, I don't know. So like I literally the other day was talking to a comp sci professor at the university who's like, I want to lock down the students on these like, the computers in the lab so they can do their exercises and stuff. Like, do you still feel like there's like a baseline, like you need to know at least this minimum stuff before you even start messing with AI? Or do you feel like it really is a teaching tool like, a first year comp sci student could jump in and learn using these tools?
I'm curious about Keith's point of view on this, but when I go down this like line of inquiry,
Mhm.
I wonder why I feel like I'm having such success. And even occasionally I'm complimented by our engineers for proposed solutions when I'm not a full stack engineer.
Mm.
And I think back to like my education in architecture school a lot. And the value of architecture school, although I don't build buildings today, was that I learned about patterns, systems, structure, component-based thinking, design as well. And so much of the way that I work with these, I think of as like transfer of learning.
Mm.
Like I'm using like architectural thinking and problem seeking to explore with AI to apply my knowledge in those design spaces to software architecture or software engineering.
Yeah.
And so it's an excellent tool for transfer of learning, like taking one context and mapping it to another context and still like finding progress.
Mhm.
I don't know if I could do that at an 18-year-old. You know
Mm.
what I mean? Like, I don't
Mhm.
know if I have the language. I don't think I
Mhm.
know enough about these types of concepts to do that well,
Mhm.
but maybe there is still that transfer of knowledge happening at the ComSci, 301 classroom where
Mm.
somebody grew up with a high school job working at a restaurant and, we can take one context and apply it to another context so that somebody grows faster. So
Yeah.
I think it's amazing for that. Or that's my take on your
So
question.
my take on it is that like I think it's just about nailing like the context of what you're working on, and that I think that there's like this misconception that even I've fallen into before. Like when I was in college, we started a company that like I ended up leaving college to continue to do, and it was awesome. And like at the time, I thought I was really smart. What the company did is we just created like question answer websites like Stack Overflow for individual colleges, and we got a bunch of users because that's super useful,
Mm.
It
right?
was like super popular when we were in
And I've
college.
learned
It was
over
wild.
time that that it is indeed not because I am good at web development or anybody on our team was good at web development, even though that was the thing we met at a hackathon. So that's like what we thought it was, right? That we were very good. But like ultimately what that is like, it's kind of like lightning in a bottle that you could capture if you invest in a lot of really young people in
Mm.
theory, right? But like we had a full idea of what that problem was and what the nuances of that problem were because we had literally just lived it. Of like coming into college, like we went to Texas A&M, where it's like 60,000 students, and it sucks to get an answer to anything. Probably still, right? And it's
Probably
like,
worse.
yeah, and it's like but we had a full context of what the full loop of that problem actually looked like. We didn't make any money because I didn't know we didn't know really what that looked like. And so it's like if you know what you're aiming at and what you're trying to do, right? Like then the really good things can come out. And then there's also the virtue of exploring and like kind of finding out those new things, and that's like a good way to learn. But like when you capture that lightning in a bottle, it doesn't mean that you can go build like the next great banking app just because you built this like app that's a consumer use case. In fact, like a use case in a university is almost always the easiest because there's not a person involved to tell you, no, I'm not going to pay you. There's just people signing up.
Yeah.
And so in a
Yeah.
lot of
Yeah.
those cases, like you could build things pretty fast, but like there's no such thing as like the perfect app or the perfect anything, right? There's just like,
Mhm.
did you nail the exact use case for what this is being used for?
Mm. Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
And so I think that as we've gotten older, Eli, I think it's just our experience over time and potentially the way we approach the problems. But like it's just got a lot to do of like when a client tells us what they want, we know what they're asking for without them having to say it like a bunch of times. And like that's just come from experience.
Mm.
Like, and there's not going to be an app that's going to tell them to know what to say, in
Yeah.
my
Mhm.
experience.
Yeah. So we did successfully index the repo. So I wanted to show the agent working on this, and then we'll have to wrap up because we're gonna have to move on to our next session and actually get to real work. And this has been super fun, Brice. I just appreciate the time and the thinking. You're a brilliant human. I just am so thankful we got to work together with NLM and that you were willing, to come and spend this 90 minutes with us or so.
Oh no, it's really my pleasure. Yeah, no, it was absolutely great to come across your work. It was really interesting. the whole design thinking space is just really cool in general. And yeah, thank you for inviting me on. It's good to have some more experienced folks take a look at this idea and maybe give me some ideas on how to get started with that going forward. So it's been
Yeah,
absolutely
and
fantastic.
who knows, maybe we just like dedicate another session, keep building it. Like let's see how far we could push it so you can take something and run with it. But I'll just mention here the reason I really like ChatGPT with the agent mode using these connectors is this agent is now just running through that GitHub repo that we had put up, looking at variety of files. We can watch it over time, so you can like go back and send this to a teammate and show what the agent was doing, which is really powerful. And you can take over, control it as you want. And this has just been a total game changer for me to make sure that I'm looking critically at a repo outside the context of like my problem solver, on the other side of these things. And so it might take quite some time to actually complete, right? These can run for 20 minutes, 30
Wow.
minutes sometimes. So maybe this is a good stopping point. We've shown some folks some interesting tools. I'll share a link to the repo, Brice, so you can just grab it publicly and see how it, see if you want to break it open at all.
Yeah.
And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, this is
Thanks so
awesome, Brice.
much.
This is awesome. I love talking to you.
Thanks for listening to this live coding session on AI DIY. We love all of our listeners and thank you so much for your time. We recently crossed 1,000 minutes on Spotify and appreciate your likes, comments, shares, and support.